Okay, picking up where I left off, we are going to look at the global economic problems and then the American response to the worldwide depression that was taking place. As I was saying, the United States failed to recognize Europe's problem. At the end of World War I, European nations owed over $10 billion to their former ally, the United States. Their economies had been devastated by war, and they had no way of paying the money back. Now, the United States was insisting that the former allies pay that money back. At the end of World War I, the U.S. had insisted that all of its wartime loans to European nations be repaid in full, but at the same time, its tariff policies had greatly reduced the sale of European goods in America. War reparations burdened Germany throughout the 1920s, and although some relief had come with the U.S. loans under the Dawes Plan, the market collapsed in 1929. These loans were suspended. So Europe's difficulties contributed to the depression in the United States. The cycle couldn't continue of America investing in European nations and nations repaying loans to America. In 1922, the U.S. passed the Fordney-McCumber Act, which instituted those high tariffs on industrial products. And that tariff is a tax on imports. When other nations retaliated, that helps bring about the Great Depression. Now, what is America going to do about it? Dealing with the Depression. We have President Hoover, who he was wrong, but not alone in that wrongness and thinking about the Depression being short-lived. He really, until the summer of, I said 1830, I mean 1930 there, he hesitated to ask Congress for legislative action on the economy. He took a traditional view that public relief should come from state and local governments. And so this traditional view, it was there that state and local governments should step in, not that the government should step in. Now, that traditional view was somewhat inefficient when we're looking at the severity of the Great Depression. Now, responding to the worldwide depression, European prosperity was closely tied to the United States. The Hawley-Smoot Tariff, 1930. June of 1930, the president signed this into law, and it was scheduling tariff rates at the highest in history. The Hawley-Smoot Tariff, passed by the Republican Congress, set tax increases ranging from 31% to 49% on foreign imports. Its political purpose was to satisfy business leaders. They were thinking that a higher tariff would protect the markets from foreign competition. Now, in retaliation for the U.S. tariff, European countries enacted their own high tariffs for U.S. goods. So that was a problem. The effect was countries, nobody actually being able to afford imports and exports. Now, the next action would be a debt moratorium. This was 1931. Conditions had gotten so bad in Europe and the United States that the Dawes Plan for collecting war debts couldn't continue. So Hoover proposes a moratorium or suspension on internet payment of international debts. Britain and Germany are all for it. They readily accept. France kind of balks at that. Remember, France was the one that really wanted Germany to pay. The international economy suffered from massive loan defaults, and banks on both sides scrambled to meet demands. Now, domestic problems. By 1931, Hoover was convinced that some government action was needed. He signed into law programs that offered assistance to indebted farmers and struggling businesses. The Federal Farm Board, created in 1929, was actually created in 1929 before the stock market crashed. But its powers are going to be later enlarged. This board was authorized to help farmers stabilize prices by temporarily holding surplus grains and cotton in storage. Now, it was too modest to really handle the overproduction of farm goods, but it was an attempt. Now, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, or RFC, was created early in 1932. It was for propping up faltering railroads, banks, life insurance companies, financial institutions. The president reasoned that emergency loans from the RFC would help to stabilize those businesses. The benefits would be then, here's the dreaded trickle down to smaller businesses. Democrats scoff at the measure, saying it would only help the rich. And that's typically the response anytime you speak of trickle down, and you'll see that much later when we talk about modern day economic issues. Now, this despair and protest, there was unrest on the farms. I mean, they didn't like that their farms were being taken, so you had farmers in the Midwest forming what was called a Farm Holiday Association, and they're going to stop the entire crop of grain harvested in 1932 from reaching market. The effort collapsed after some violence. Another protest is a veterans protest called the Bonus March. It was a desperate summer of 1932. We have thousands of unemployed World War I veterans marching to Washington, D.C., demanding immediate payment of the bonuses promised them at a later date, that being 1945. So they were eventually joined by thousands of other veterans who brought their wives, their children, and entire families camped in shacks or shanty towns near the Capitol. Congress failed to pass the bonus bill that they were seeking, and two veterans ended up getting killed in a clash with police, and Hoover orders the Army to break up that encampment. General Douglas MacArthur, the Army's chief of staff, used tanks and tear gas to destroy the shanty town and drive the veterans from Washington. This incident caused many Americans to regard Hoover as heartless and uncaring. So this bonus army was just a public relations nightmare for the government, because I mean they were camped out in the Capitol, and the government puts down this this protest. Now, the Hoovervilles. This is another issue where President Hoover is seen as heartless and uncaring. And basically these are shacks that are established in, as you can see here, it looks like dump areas. And people lived here. This was where they existed, where they called home. Now, the election of 1932. We have FDR promising a New Deal, and Hoover declaring that prosperity is just around the corner. Nobody's really wanting to hear about prosperity being just around the corner. It's 1932. They're tired of waiting. So remember back to that chart, in the map in the election of 1928. Now Hoover is all blue, different colors this time. Smith is in that khaki little color. Okay, and Hoover overwhelmingly won the United States. Look at 1932. Roosevelt carries the country, 472 electoral votes. The nation's ready for change. Democrats had nominated Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was a New York governor. And they also nominated Speaker of the House John Nance Garner of Texas for vice president. So as a candidate, Roosevelt pledged a New Deal for the American people, a repeal of prohibition, and for the unemployed, and he also pledged cuts in government spending. And as you can see by the map here, the results were overwhelmingly Roosevelt. In his inaugural address, so first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. Our greatest primary task is to put people to work. This is no unsolvable problem if you face it wisely and courageously. So the American public feels that Roosevelt is going to be a boost. He pledges to recognize and the problem, the crisis. There's assertion. We will survive, we will prosper, and there's a clear declaration of leadership. This nation asks for action, and action now. We're going to take it. Here we go. Now, Hoover was a lame duck president. For 4 months between Roosevelt's election and his inauguration, this March of 1933, Hoover was still president. and it's referred to as a lame duck, meaning powerless. And he was powerless to cope with the Depression. He did offer to work with the president-elect through this long period, but Roosevelt declines because he doesn't really want to be tied to anything Hoover's doing. The 20th Amendment, the lame duck amendment, is passed February of 1933 and ratified by October of 33, shortening the period between presidential election and inauguration. The amendment set the inauguration date at January 20. So again, FDR is going to be responsible for two presidential amendments. One being the lame duck, and then the other being the term limits for president. Now, Roosevelt pledges a New Deal, and we're going to explore this New Deal philosophy. Okay, he pledged the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. He sets up, immediately after being sworn into office on March 4th, 1933, Roosevelt called Congress into a 100-day-long special session. During this period, Congress passes into law every request of President Roosevelt, enacting more legislation than any single Congress in history. Roosevelt's going to turn to a group of university professors as his advisors. It's called the Brain Trust. And this Brain Trust would be Rexford Tugwell, Raymond Moley, and Adolph A. Burrell Jr. Okay, and during this first 100 days, Roosevelt gets a lot passed through Congress. He manages to get through many different acts, and we're going to take a look at each one of those and look at the New Deal, the Second New Deal, and some of America's reaction to it. Okay, I will pick up there with the next video. Make sure you're taking notes on these, and if you get a chance, take a look at the United Streaming Great Depression video. I gave you those logins in class just the other day.